The legacy of Space War means that in gaming's early days, there were so many titles released, which took on the mantle of adapting its core mechanics for a wider audience. Whilst Asteroids may have been the breakout hit, Midway's Omega Race is one of those which spun the formula in quite a different way. Released in 1981, Omega Race pits you as a soldier in the far-off Andromeda system, taking part in the so-called Omega Race. No, it's not a race like you'd expect, but rather a dangerous training scenario pitting you against advanced combat droids in a track-like arena. The goal of each stage being to clear them out whilst avoiding them, their fire, and the mines left in their wake. Like many games of this era, home computer ports followed, but surprisingly there were only two, for the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, both published by Commodore themselves a year later. We'll take a look at the VIC-20 version first, and you can see when booting up, this was originally a cartridge game, you actually get a very nice replication of the attract mode. This just adds quite a bit of polish to this game, just looking at doing the attract mode like the actual arcade game. Then you get your options screen, and the interesting thing about it is there are a couple of surprising options here. The first is the ability to play with a paddle. The original arcade game actually used a spinner controller, much like you'd see in games like Tempest. And so the paddle controls really are an attempt to emulate them. You turn the paddle to rotate your ship, tap the fire button to shoot, and hold it down to thrust. You also got the unique ability to change the background and foreground colours. I guess, being that Omega Race is a vector game, and depending on the arcade cabinet, you didn't quite have the classic white on black you'd have in other machines, it lets you customise it a bit more. But start the game, and you can see that it's actually pretty darn impressive. A lot of people call this VIC-20 version one of the best games on the machine, and as you can see, it's really fluid to play. The controls are a little oversensitive though. You do have to take some effort in getting used to them. But graphically, it feels like the arcade game, just a little chunkier. And yet, the player craft, the bullets, all the enemies, they're all moving about pretty smoothly on the humble little VIC-20. Quite a surprise, I mean, I've got to say it, I was really blown away playing it. And the playability is kept here. It's a fast, frantic game where you're moving about, taking those targets out, and hoping that the enemies don't evolve from the standard droids to the heavier ones and eventually the death ones, sparks that hunt you down relentlessly across the stage. For such an early release, it feels excellent to play. It's really well put together, it's very polished, it's a good challenge, and while the joystick controls are a little sensitive, you do get used to them in the end, and it's really good fun. But let's change track and look at the C64 version. Much like the VIC-20, this was released in 1982, and that of course makes it in the first year of life of the C64, which has its ups and downs. The first thing you'll notice, the presentation is much more Spartan than on the 64's older brother. There's no replication of the attract sequence here, you've just got this main menu with the same control options for paddles, joystick, and setting the colours. When you get into the game, however, this is where things get interesting. The higher resolution of the 64's graphics hardware really makes the game look even better. It looks very nice and crisp, and having more sprites means that you can actually get a much smoother result of your gameplay. And whilst it looks nice on screen, where it falls apart really is in the controls. As I mentioned with the VIC-20 version, the controls are a little sensitive and a little hard to get used to. On the 64 version, it's worse, much worse. The controls are ridiculously sensitive, and it's very hard to glide smoothly around the arena, something that you could pretty much do in the VIC-20 version, but also is part of the original arcade game. It just doesn't feel right, and for me at least, I actually found it much less enjoyable. I did also try the paddle controls here, and I don't know if it's just those stock Commodore paddles, but it's not very comfortable to play at all. This is one you really have to sit down with a joystick. Both versions feel pretty much the same in terms of the progression. Waves will start off with few enemies, they'll move slowly, most of them will stay static, but as you fight your way through the game, in classic arcade tradition, you will get more enemies. They will start speeding up as they move. The time between starting a level and the enemies evolving into the dev ships slowly and slowly dwindles down. And I've got to say, I hadn't really played Omega Race much prior to checking it out here. I decided to do that because I just acquired a VIC-20 and acquired the C64 version separately. And I thought it would be great to sit down and give it a bit of a whirl. And one of the things I found is I actually found myself really enjoying the arcade version. But in terms of home releases, the VIC-20 version really does live up to the hype. It really is an amazing conversion for such a limited piece of hardware. Thankfully, of course, it's a cartridge game, which means that you're not limited compared to other early games on the machine, and it pays off in spades. Commodore's developers really made something special here, and it's well worth checking out. Sadly, I wish I could say the same for the Commodore 64 version. The really loose controls, the sensitivity making them just a little too twitchy to play, really drags the game down, which is a shame, because graphically, it, as I was talking about earlier, it does look fairly nice on screen. I do admit, I wish there was a bit more of the presentation. I feel that they may have cut too much of it off for the cartridge, and as a result, the game really does suffer for it. And with that, I think I'm going to leave it here. This is just a quick one to do something a little different in order to showcase another new machine for the channel. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you played Omega Race on either machine? Do you think I'm right? How do you feel? Have you played on any other machine? There's a couple of other conversions that aren't quite in my space to cover. And with that, do hit the subscribe button. As always, new videos come out Fridays. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.